Drew, how's it going? Thank you very much for coming on Just Get a Real Job. You're in New York right now. How's your day going? How are you?
So far, so good. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to chat with you. I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm just kind of being a bit of a recluse this week, and I'm holed up in my apartment here in New York working on a new project, and that's all I've been doing. Been kind of tunnel vision on that new project and this one we got going out in London right now.
Very exciting. And just to sort of introduce you for our listeners, that you're a musician, a songwriter, and a composer, and you do a lot of musical theatre stuff. And you're about to take a show to London very soon, called "We Aren't Kids Anymore," which is really exciting. That started debuts on the 28th of April, I believe.
That is right. You got everything right. Yeah. Do a lot of songwriting, mostly in the musical theater world, and I just love it in that world. And so I'm lucky to be able to be doing this, and I'm so excited to bring this show to London because every time I'm in the UK, I get there's a real warm welcome for me there, and I am so appreciative of that. So I'm really looking forward to bringing this project there.
Mm. Something I want to kind of ask you actually straight away off the bat, because often, we have mostly UK-based creative people on the show,
Yeah.
and we don't get we'd had a few Americans on and stuff. But what do you think are the main differences between America and the UK for you as a creative? So when you come to like London, for example, do you notice like quite a big difference to New York, or is there some sort of similarities and stuff?
There is my experience with how commercial theater is produced in New York versus how it's
Mm,
produced in the UK is it seems to go, and I don't know if it's just the particular projects I tend to work on, but it seems to go at a much quicker pace from conversation to actual fruition, seeing the thing up on a stage or in the next phase of development or whatever. There are some times this is I found this frustration in New York, but I haven't found it in the UK yet. And I have two
mm,
projects so far going on in the UK, but in New York, we'll go a whole year without ever having a meeting or a discussion or seeing what's next. And we have this thing written. We've done our job. We wrote the show. And now we're just waiting for like 45 other schedules to align so that we can kind of get to the not even get a production, just to get to the next phase of
mm.
putting the show up in front of friends and family with music stands. Like it just takes so long. And in New York on Broadway, there's basically a rough timeline from 5 to 10 years that you dedicate your life to a show before it goes from page to stage. And that's sometimes that doesn't even happen. There are shows that have been waiting 30 years for a Broadway theater. And so I've been met with a lot of that in the United States, and I haven't seen so much of that in the UK. And again, I don't know if it's because maybe there's just more excitement there with what I have going on personally, just in terms of what I'm working on, and maybe everybody in my home country has very little interest in what it is I have to say or what it is I'm working on. So that could be it too. It's hard to say like what a difference is because it's only through
Mm.
my experience, but that is something that I've noticed in my experience.
Mm. That's really interesting. When I've had people on the show before, one of the differences they notice is that people tend to be slightly more encouraging of your pursuing creative dreams in the US. In the UK, where I grew up in Scotland and stuff, often people are a bit like that. The whole name of this podcast is Just Get a Real Job, because that is the attitude that you get met with if you want to go and have a career in the arts.
Yeah.
And that I feel that quite strongly in the UK. A lot of my friends who have maybe normal jobs they don't understand why I work in TV or why I pursued do this podcast and stuff.
I think that is
Yeah.
actually a similar symptom of the United States is a lot of people kind of
Mm,
just don't understand it at all. They're very fascinated by you when
mm,
you kind of take the pivot into dedicating your life to show business or the arts or something like that. Most people in America really don't understand it, I think. But here's what I'll have to say is like, the thing I have to remind myself all the time is just how. Can I swear on this podcast? By the way, I
yeah,
almost let one
please
go.
swear
Oh,
away. You're
okay.
speaking to a
How,
Scotsman, so
that's right. I forgot. That's right. Just how fucking big America is. There's so like it
mm,
feels like a third of the world's population or some shit like that is in our goddamn country. And when you go to England, you're getting, it's jam-packed on the island out there, you're all jam-packed. So I feel like it's the same amount of people who don't understand, but there's just more of them in the United States who say, I'm going to go and be in the arts. But it's the same ratio of people that are in the UK. That's what I think it is. I really do. So we outnumber you because there's more people here. But I think it's pretty similar in terms of who just plainly don't understand our pursuits out here. I do very well out here, and I knock on wood every day. I'm very grateful that I'm able to make a living doing this. But every time I go home, I still have relatives in my family who put $1 in my pocket because they think I'm homeless out here, and really trying and struggling still. And believe me, there were those years, but my gosh, Also, there's something about being an artist. Sorry, and now I'm a New Yorker and you won't shut me up. I'm just going to keep talking. It's like there's something about being an artist where it's not necessarily a choice. It's not like people say they don't understand the choice to go work in television or the choice to go do this. I never thought of this as a choice. I felt so strange going to school when I was younger because I was like, wait, why am I here learning what the hell a right angle is when I already know what I'm going to go off and do after this? Why do I need algebra in my life? And by the way, show of hands, world, raise your hand, anybody in the world, if you've ever used fucking algebra in your adult life after school. But, there's a strong case for those of us who are in the arts. I'm going to keep going. May I keep going? Can I keep going here on the arts?
Please do. I'm nodding along.
There's something that a lot of people don't understand about the arts, and it's not the whimsical lackadaisiness of being an artist and getting up and going, gee, what song am I going to write today? It's not like we're sitting here playing our guitars going, why am I not famous yet? There are no rules. There is no linear platform. There is no drawn out direction for anybody who chooses the path of being an artist. It is something that we are creating. We are the CEOs and the employees. We are the company. People who choose other jobs, they have an understanding that once you get this job, you get a promotion, you keep climbing the ladder. That's what success looks like when it's linear. We are taking a giant gamble, and the gamble is on ourselves. We believe so much in ourselves that we can't even stop this sickness we have, which I call being an artist. We can't stop this sickness from taking over our entire bloodstream and forcing us into this life. And I'll take the life of ups and downs and feast and famine over security and making sure I get a base hit rather than a grand slam every once in a while. Sorry for the baseball terminology. I know that's some American shit for your listeners. But I'd much rather choose that with the fear and the insecurity that comes along with it than I would the stability that most people are told to follow. And the reason I phrase it that way is because there's nothing wrong with that stability either. But I'm pointing out the fact that people think people in the arts are crazy because it doesn't fall in line with a structure that they've been kind of implemented into their lives. I'm just going to say one last thing about the arts. Am I here to promote something? I'm here to promote a show, right?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. This is what this podcast is all about. So
this is something like how football out there, like soccer, you guys have, it's the most massive thing in the entire world, just like sports are in the United States. Football, baseball, basketball, they are so massive. They fill stadiums, right? I want to paint this picture for those who don't understand the economics of the arts. And they think that what we're doing is absolutely crazy because what we essentially are doing is foregoing a steady paycheck because we're betting on ourselves to succeed down the line. A lot of us, it's mostly freelance workers and things like that, unless you're unionized and all that kind of thing. But Broadway, just Broadway, not West End, not touring houses, not regional theater, just Broadway is a billions with a B, billions of dollars a year business. Also, Broadway makes more money than the Knicks, the Nets, the Mets, the Yankees, the Giants, and the Jets combined. When I tell people that, they don't believe me. They go online, they research it. Broadway makes more money than all New York professional sports teams combined. Yet, all the money in our government is going to, or in the school systems, goes to sporting events and athletic programs. And it's first getting cut from music programs, and it's first getting cut from the arts. But the arts is supplying the economy for everybody else. You know what I mean? And the arts is also where
Uh,
team building and leadership and all those great things. It's not just sports. We have to treat the arts as if they are as important as team sports. It drives me crazy. And now I'm going to check my heart rate, make sure I'm not going to blow a gasket. I'm going to get off my soapbox, and now you and I are going to have a nice conversation. I'm really sorry about that rant.
listen, no, Drew, this podcast you've basically just nailed about 6 of the main sort of themes I've used this podcast for the last 4 or so years to explore. Like, I think that's so true on the economy stuff as well, because like in the UK, it's very similar. Like, I think TV and film made the UK, like, I think it was the 5th biggest. I've not got the exact stats, but it was a huge income in the last few years. But it doesn't get made out to be that way. And again, it is the first thing to get cut. And like in the US, the UK is in a cost of living crisis at the moment. You know, people's bills are high, shopping's expensive and stuff. Again, the first thing that people make cuts for is the arts, and without thinking about the longer term consequences. So, no, completely hear you on that. And again, there'll be a lot of our listeners going, yes, I very much agree with good. So thank you very much. So much to unpack. There's so much to unpack on that. And you were talking about how it's a non-linear industry. Again, this podcast, I try as best I can, because there's no right path in this industry, but we try as best as we can to sort of help people understand the different facets of the industry. So, for example, people listening to this episode that maybe want to work in theatre and particularly compose and write, it's interesting to get someone like yourself who's made a living from it and get your perspective on that. So I've got a few questions about your pathway and stuff like that, but let's cast your mind back slightly to your younger days. If you are okay to not rant for 5 minutes, we can rant plenty as well. It's great.
I'll do my best.
It's good to get you fired up. But do you remember when you were like, what made you first drawn to songwriting, into musical theatre particularly? Were you always into that?
Music was a powerful force in my household, and my mom is a music teacher, so that was always just very about when I was young. And my dad was I always say he's like a Led Zeppelin induced drummer who chose kind of the white collar path. You know, his parents didn't. It's exactly what we're talking about. There was a lack of understanding of his artistic drive, so he didn't get the support. And tale as old as time, he had kids, and then he gave us all support. Same with my mom. They gave us a lot of support in pursuing whatever it is we loved. Most of us, there's four kids in the family, chose music or the arts. My brother's a ceramicist. Both my sisters are performers and writers and musicians. And my youngest sister was just nominated for a Grammy this year. Like,
whoa,
wild. So it's just been very prevalent ever since we were growing up. There were musical instruments all over our house. My mom was like a fanatic collector of anything that shook or rang or jingled or buzzed and strummed, and everything. So it was just accessible. That being said, none of us really took lessons. Our mom was a music teacher, and it was just around. So we'd sit around and pick up instruments and kind of play around. And my mom and dad listened to the best songwriters ever, James Taylor and the Beatles and Paul Simon and, Grateful Dead, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, list goes on. So I was just surrounded by it. And then the theater element of that was purely from my mother. Aside from my dad being a clown and a ham, there was no theatricality from him on a professional standpoint. But my mom would actually direct school shows and do professional and semi-professional theater in our neighborhood. So we would see these musicals all the time. And I fell in love with it and started doing musicals when I was about 10.
Wow. That's quite an you're surrounded by it, like.
Engulfed. There was no escaping it.
Did it always? You were talking earlier about being in school and knowing what you wanted to do and stuff from a young age as well. Yeah. Did it always feel possible, or was it a long period where you?
Well, no. It did. It always felt possible. That is 100% the truth. It always felt possible, and but I was told that it wasn't by a lot of people growing up. I had teachers who were very anti my antics, very, and I, to give them some credit, I was the kid who would bring his guitar to school instead of his book bag, and I would just sit in the back of the class and like noodle around on guitar, and I wouldn't want that kid in my class either. So, to their defense, but I was told by many a teacher, and my grandmother, my Italian grandmother, God love her, she didn't understand when I was saying, "Oh, I want to be a performer. Oh, I want to be a songwriter. Oh, I want," And then when I moved to New York to pursue musical theater, I, I think they're like, "Oh, that makes sense because it's Drew and he always has done music, but this is not a real career. I can't wait till he stops playing pretend." There was a bit of that.
Mm.
Um, but there was also very loud support when I was young from my aunts and uncles and family and my siblings. But yeah, I was met with some, okay, grow out of this. And even when I was cashing, I have a memory of being in New York and I had a royalty check. And I didn't. This was before you could deposit checks online and take a picture of the check. And
Mm.
I had to go to the bank and I cashed the check. And she was asking me she's like, newmusicaltheater.com. What is that? I was like, oh, I sell sheet music. Kids sing my songs around the country, and it's musical theater stuff. And she goes, oh, how are your parents with that? Like she was like, are they okay with your choices? Like, and when do you imagine you're gonna choose your path? I was like, oh, this is it. I'm sorry. And by the way, you're a bank teller. What are you doing? Are we going to sit and compare our decisions in life here? It made me so irate. So I think I've had such a strong belief in myself that I really do get combative when people even suggest that there is an impossibility in front of me. There might be a challenge, but there was never a question that this is what I was going to pursue from a young enough age that I'm not fucking around here, folks. Let's go.
Love that. You got it's I mean, it's hard, isn't it, when you're so determined and you have a dream. And again, it's good that again I like the podcast, and hopefully people are listening in that position now. It's like you can be realistic and go, well, I might not make it to there yet, but it's like trying to think like what pragmatic things can I do to pay the bills or whatever, and still have that belief. And I think other people
Yes.
believing in you goes so far as well. And it's hard to believe in
Yes.
yourself sometimes.
Yes. Yes. And that's another thing, the paying the bills thing. Let's truncate this as much as I can.
Mhm.
We'll call it a mini rant. The paying the bills thing. The world it's going to be expensive. I live in New York, the UK, California. Anywhere you really want to live is going to be so expensive. And if you're choosing something, a career that doesn't give you the constant paycheck to be not just paying your bills, but putting money aside, that's the part that they're not saying is like, well, you are making money. You're just not saving money. Your rent is getting paid, maybe just barely, but at
Mhm.
least you're surviving. The survival is what gets us artists from just this one point to this next point. And that's a very important distinction, I think, is a lot of people
Mhm.
quit on the pursuit of it because they're not making money. I was so good at being broke for like 10 years because the idea of money getting in the way. No, it was way too late. I already said I'm going to do this. There's nothing that could stop me at that point. So I made, and this is not me saying it like, oh, and I'm so special because I did this, but I had to do whatever I had to do just to make my bills paid. It
Mhm.
wasn't to make money. It was to make sure I survived, which is not a sustainable lifestyle forever. But when you're starting, you need to be able to do that and trust that at the other end of that struggling period, there is going to be something there that pays large enough. You set this cushion aside, and now you can kind of work at this without the stress of, am I going to make this month's nut? So anyway, I just
Mhm.
wanted to say that too, because a lot of people, I feel like they quit on something they are so meant to do and something they are so destined and amazing at. And they call it quits because some voice in their head is saying you're not making enough money. So,
Mhm.
we readjust what those standards are as we go. But I feel like I'm talking artist to
Yeah.
artist here. I'm not
No,
even thinking about
completely.
the
Yeah.
audience of the podcast. I feel like I'm just, you and I are having this chat like artist to artist. It's
Mhm.
like,
But I think that's good as well, because I think that's what, that's what good podcasts, and it's, I'm really grateful I get to have conversations like this. I think the other things as well though is, like, I think it's really tricky for people when they're in that fight and flight mode of surviving. So
yeah,
I do sympathize, and I think it's important to know yourself, because some people, like, in all honesty, I'm really bad at the uncertain part of this industry, because growing
yeah,
up without a lot of money coming in all the time, I'm quite insecure about, like, I worry about bills, and I worry about, like, having a stable life and stuff. So I think, because I know that about myself, I've taken other precautions. So I always make sure to have a certain amount of money saved, which is a luxury, I know, but I maybe made certain choices where I, worked in other things for a bit to give myself that position. So I think
right.
it's different for everyone. I think it's great, like you're saying, if you can find a way to survive on very little money and you can find skills for that, that's a really good strategy. Or if you can be pragmatic, maybe in the way I have, where you think, right, I'm going
Yes,
to save for 2 years, but I'm only working this job for 2 years, because after that, I'm going to do these it's stuff like that, I suppose. Um, there's different approaches, but give us a few
absolutely.
tips and stuff. Yeah, I'm curious. What things did you do to survive on very little money? If somebody's listening to this and they want to go for your method of, I'm going to just try and get by on little money, have you got any tips or any
Okay.
lessons you can share?
Uh, Number one, lie. So I've said this example, and this is like this. None of this is going to paint me out to be like an amazing human person, but I will get back to my point about surviving and money, and just to counter what you just said, because what you just said is absolutely right, and both narratives need to be part of the dialogue. And I'm going to get slightly more specific with what I have to say about that particular topic, but when I first moved here, I got a job creating curriculum for children's education, and a prerequisite was a degree in said field. And I said I had one, just very trusting that no one was going to ask if they could see my degree. And no one did, and I got hired, and I had that job for 3 years. I also, like, even like I got hired to valet, even though I didn't know how to drive stick shift. I only know how to drive automatic. And I remember, this is a true story, Jim Carrey, the actor, pulled up in a Lamborghini, and I got in, and only because I was like, I gotta go meet Jim Carrey. I have to go meet Jim Carrey. So I go up, I was like, "Hello, sir," and I took his keys and I got in his car, and it's a stick shift, and I have no idea how this thing works. But everybody who hired me, who's right outside the car, thinks that I do know how to drive stick shift. Anyway, the car made a violently horrifying sound when I tried to drive it, and I got yanked out of there and fired on the spot. So there's a lesson in not lying, but the hireability came from yes, I can, yes, I will, yes, I'm going to. So all the jobs that paid my way through New York were like catering jobs, bartending jobs. I used to play songs at kids' birthday parties, and all of that came from meeting people. They go, "Oh, you're looking for that? You know, I can do that." And I'd never done it. I'd never had the experience of any of the things I volunteered for. I just needed to get paid, you know? So I would say anything outside of the realm of prostitution up until this point, I have said yes to and tried to do just to get my bills paid. Um,
Mm.
can I say one thing though about when I say find enough just to survive, because the idea of getting good being broke, I understand that that is a stressful thing, but if you cannot get comfortable in the being broke thing, this is the example I want to use. A lot of actors, and many of them might be listening to this podcast, people in musical theater, they tend to take on these gigs, and there is nothing wrong with these gigs. This really applies to New York actors. But if you take a cruise ship gig, it takes you out to sea for 6 months to a year. You are out in the ocean, so you're not paying taxes on it because you're in international waters. You're put up in a cabin, so you're not paying for your rent. You're being fed, so you're not paying for food. You're pocketing so much money. By the time your contract is about to be over and it's time to move back to New York, you're like, I'm just going to sign up and do another one of these because the money was so good. 6 years later, you're like, wow, I'm still doing the same show on the cruise ship. I haven't done anything creatively outside of this little bubble that I've been a part of for 6 years. So I'm going to go back to New York now. But all those casting directors that have been waiting for you for 6 years, you've just been out to sea and you have to start all over again. And networking is a gigantic part of the career choice. So that circle gets smaller and smaller sometimes when you choose for the sake of safety rather than for the sake of the gamble you have to keep on yourself, the bet you're putting on yourself. So that was just like the last little thing I wanted to squeeze into that part of the conversation.
That's really interesting. I was about to ask you, Drew. My next question on the top of my head was going to be: there'll be people listening to this that are a bit comfortable now, right? They're maybe they're in the opposite position where they went for the safe job, which again I totally respect that. Part of me is very much sometimes like, what the fuck are you doing? Go and work at a bloody bank, or I would never will. But do you know what I mean? It's like, oh my god, you could be on this, and it's like the lovely safety. Sometimes you're like, oh, come to me. Because it's a survival thing. But what would you sort of say to those people that maybe did that and now they're maybe a bit older, which again is fine. You can get into things at any age, and they're scared to give that up and go and pursue that because it's even harder to do that when you're comfortable. Weirdly, sometimes it's probably easier when you have nothing. I remember when I was 24 and
You're right.
I was working. I was working part-time in care, like with disabled adults, and I earned okay money. I was getting by, right? I would do fucking anything to work in TV. I worked in the COVID department. I used to pay for my own hotels in the city to go and work in other places in Scotland. I couldn't do that now because I've been on a decent salary for 4 years. I can't imagine doing that now. So I totally get that. You know what I mean? It's that hunger. So I don't know what would you say to someone in that position?
Well, I think there's just a little bit of nuance in the Department of the Arts because there is job is one thing, and career and job are different things to me. And career is something I think a lot more you have to sacrifice a lot more in order to nurture this career. To get jobs, you can go out and go get jobs. What bothers me is people taking jobs. Like I highly doubt, and anybody out there with a different perspective, of course, slap me on the wrist, message us here on this podcast and tell us what a shithead Drew is. But I do think that people who are doing cruise ships, for 6 years in a row are only doing it for the paycheck rather than why they started doing the arts in the first place. And again, this is where I have to really define. I think that's totally fine. That's like a really blue collar method of going and working in the arts. But at a certain point, the artist that I am, so this is really coming from a personal standpoint, I need to be creative. I need to be challenged as well. So if you're going to be doing 6 years on a cruise ship and that's going to satisfy you, you might as well go work at a myriad of restaurants or bars just to get the money to pay your bills while you're still finding that artistic thing to challenge you. Because the thing that's going to keep you growing and stagnancy and plateauing is a shot in the foot for any artist. And the idea of keeping this career going, again, we don't have this linear path. We just have this thing that we carry with us, and we hope it expands and expands and expands. But it's not going to keep expanding unless it gets challenged and forced, just like any muscle group. Unless you start using heavier weights, that muscle is going to be the same size. You know what I mean? So it's like if we put that into practice into our own careers, doing those. I know people who have been in Wicked for like 15 years. And they're paid, they've gotten their pay bumps every single season or every year, and they've managed to like have a really cushy life and buy houses and put kids through college. And I think that is awesome. But I think telling the narrative to other artists, like this is how you have to do it to make a living, is also a false way to go about it. There is a lot of gray area between those places. And I think it's kind of unfair. And forgive if any of my rants thus far have sounded like it is a black and white system. But there is so much gray matter that if you don't acknowledge the gray matter, everyone thinks they're getting into this with a set of rules to follow. And the truth is you're making everything up as you go. Everything, in hopes, the industry is made a show business. What are you, fucking high? That's not real. That's the people in charge of show business. Do you think any of them are artists? No, it's business. It's business that has to do with show every once in a while. And I hate that I'm not always reaping the benefits of the business side of it when I'm putting my blood, sweat, and tears. But again, I choose my journey every single time over being the suit with the $1 million bonus. I do. I will always choose that. Wow. God, I'm full of rants today. Somebody find me. Every time I rant, I owe the podcast $100. Okay. Well, just something like that.
Listen, we'll take the investment, man. We'll take the investment. No, listen, I appreciate your passion. I think it's really interesting to get different perspectives. And I think you touched on something I want to reiterate as well. Like, we are sharing our experiences. This is completely black. It's completely grey. There is the problem. It's so hard sometimes in this industry because there is no right path. There is no specific rules. I think it's useful to get perspectives and stuff. And we're not saying don't go on a cruise ship for 6 years or don't do this, but it's just thinking about it like in the long term. Yes. I think because we're trying to survive, we often think about things in a short window instead of a medium to longer window. So if you're thinking, well, if I maybe do this and take the pain for 3-4 years, then in 15 years, I might have a decent wage, but also I'll be fulfilled. Whereas like you might be comfortable, but in 20 years, you're going to look back and go, what the fuck was I thinking? I was great being on a cruise ship for 6 years, but I blew it. And now I've got this great house, but I'm quite sad and it's too late. So it's a balance. It depends what you want, but I think it's thinking about things in a medium to long term as well. And that's really hard when you're trying to survive.
Well, that's part of that job versus career thing. A job could be a gig, a quick thing you go do. A career is this thing that you want to see lasting somewhere deep into the future. It's got to be this long thing. And thank you for clarifying that. I'm not here saying, hey, if you work on a cruise ship, you're a piece of shit. That's not what I'm saying. I am just exactly what you said. I'm offering another perspective. That's all.
Yeah, completely. There's loads more I want to talk to you about your pathway and your being a composer, but I think we'll plug the show now for a bit because we've had it's been 30 minutes already, which is amazing. Some really interesting topics. I love the tangents we're going on. It's I sent you some questions and I feel like I've asked you one of them, but I don't even mind because that's what the best podcasts always do. I always leave an episode like this going, yes, that was brilliant because you don't.
Oh, good, great.
Which I enjoy. But let's talk about We Aren't Kids Anymore. One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you, Drew, is I love this idea that you want to give unseen talent a chance in such a quite a hard industry to break into. We often see the same people, those from quite well-off backgrounds. I love the concept that you're trying to give people from any group a chance to just get their big break and stuff. So tell us about We Aren't Kids Anymore and the sort of project and idea behind it.
Absolutely. So We Aren't Kids Anymore is it's a brand new musical that is a derivative of a concept album that I released right as the global pandemic was afoot, right as that began happening. And whether it's the timing of, people needed to find these songs or whatever, because of the bleakness of the world led people to find some, angsty musical theater songs. It for some reason did very well in terms of the enthusiasm behind the material during this time. And we got a phone call. My agents set me up with a meeting with this guy, Chris Cumming, who's wonderful director, choreographer, and theater mind in the UK. And he just loved the material and said, what else? It's an album, but it's a show. What is it? It's a show. We should make this into a show. And over the course of 3 years, I just wanted to make sure it didn't feel like a concert. I really wanted it to feel like a theatrical experience. Because, we could just do the concert wherever. It doesn't really matter. But this is going to be a true new defining moment, I think, for musical theater in terms of what a musical can or cannot or should not be. And it's a series of vignettes. We have a wonderful director named Jake Smith who has taken this material, and my friend Rich Fitch and we have restrung this material into these vignettes of these 5 people. And what's interesting about this is it all has to do with the casting, I think, way more than the material. I'm sure there are people on the creative team who would say the material is blah, blah, blah. But as the guy who wrote the material, I'm here saying what I think is actually very interesting is the fact that every show you see of this production. So we're doing the one show in London in April. We're doing a kind of an exclusive look at this brand new show with the hope of getting a longer production on the West End or somewhere in London. But once that production happens, those 5 characters, those 5 main actors, every single night you come to the show, they will have switched who they're playing. So you will always get a new show based on the 5 very different perspectives on stage, always swapping what they are experiencing on stage. And so if that doesn't entice you to just want to see it based on the concept without even hearing the material, I think you're foolish, because I think something like this really hasn't been done successfully with musicals before. It's been done with plays to very small extent, but I've never seen something like this with a musical. The cast is a wide spectrum from teenage to their 60s. So you have this long breadth of generational gaps going on. It's gender fluid. It is race fluid. It is human. It is the most human piece of theater I have ever written, because the entity is the 5 of them. There's not one single hero we're watching. There's not one person's journey. It is your journey. It is my journey. Sure, the music is autobiographical, but I can easily, at this point, remove myself from any of these after having watched several different casts of this in development perform this material. It makes me feel like I struck something in my mental vein here that somehow translated to others. And a lot of times as a songwriter, you're just trying to get a point across, or you're trying to convey emotion, but rarely do you get the emotion across. And I think that is what I happily, accidentally ended up doing with this material. And I'm so excited. We got such a great cast. It's going to be at the Savoy Theatre on April 28th. That's a Monday night. Our evening performance is just about sold out. We had to add a matinee performance. So there's a 4 p.m. and there's an 8 p.m. Olivier award-winning Sam Tutty, who was in Dear Evan Hansen and Two Strangers Carry a Cake Across New York. We have Dylan Mulvaney, who I am bewildered by and very honored to have them be a part of this. Amy Atkinson, Melanie Liberie. These are Broadway and West End stars that I idolize and look up to. I'm just thrilled. It's truly, truly amazing. And I think our whole creative team, Lauren Hopkinson, Chris Cumming, Jake Smith, everybody, we're putting together something that I not to toot my own horn too much here, man, but like, I don't think something like this has quite been done before. And I'm very excited. Very excited.
I mean, no, it sounds very exciting. And you're mentioning all the people involved, so it sounds like you're talking about the team as well. It's not like you're sitting talking about, oh, it was all me. Like, it sounds like a great team effort, which is really interesting.
Oh, big time. Again, the further I can remove, because of its autobiographical nature, the songs were ultimately, some of them were very joyful to write, but a lot of them were very painful. We talk about drug addiction. We talk about suicide. We talk about career anxiety, on that nonlinear path, and trying to explain to the muggles of the world what it feels like to be on that nonlinear path. There's a lot of that immersed into the show. And as good as I feel like I am at getting those thoughts into music, conveying the whole piece takes a village. And Lauren Hopkinson, music supervisor, Jake Smith, genius director, and me, Chris Cumming, and Richard Fitch, we all tied this concept together. So and I can't leave out the queen, Branya Buchanan, who is producing this, and she is part of the example of why I feel like in the UK things get done at a pace which makes me feel like people want to get things done, and she is leading that example for me. So Branya Buchanan needs a shout out. Brilliant.
Yeah, and can you tell us about the sort of given to sort of unrepresented performers an opportunity to win like a
Yes.
chance to be part of it. Can you tell us about it? Because I think that's such an interesting concept, and it's a great idea as well. It's good to
Yeah,
we don't see enough.
absolutely. So we have this, big, flashy, shiny, good, professional, well-known cast of folks as our core five, and that is exciting. It really is, and they are deserving of being a part of any show. And we are so thrilled that they said yes to being a part of this show. And honestly, when you get a room full of producers and theater goers, it really helps in those conversations when they see the Olivier Award winner and the big names
Mhm.
involved. But while we have those producers in the room, I thought it'd be nice to force feed them some new talent too, so that they themselves can see who else is out there. What I've noticed, which is this is another major difference between the U.S. and the U.K. You virtually, seemingly, cannot get a career in commercial theater unless you've gone to Mountain View, or the Guilford School of Acting, or one of those big
Mhm.
these big conservatory programs. Unless you've graduated from those schools, you don't have a chance of getting an agent. You don't have a chance of getting into these auditions, getting taken seriously, and getting, hopefully the chance, which is maybe why a lot of people scoff when they go, oh, you're going to go try be an actor. Oh, you're going to go try be an
Mhm.
artist.
And the other part to that is it's a class thing in the UK as well, because, and probably in America too, but if you don't come from a middle class or upper
Mhm.
class background where you have the money, it's much
Yeah.
harder to get into those schools. I mean, Eton, which is the big, private school in the UK, where a lot of the, prime ministers, who are not very nice either, have went to, uh, they have 5 theatres there. Like, most comprehensive schools barely have a theatre program. So it just
Right.
shows you that you're already at such a disadvantage anyway, and then you have to get into one of those big, drama schools or
And then all
conservatoires, as
those
you
people are
say.
going to
Yeah.
go get jobs. All those people are going to go get jobs, and then they're going to be in charge of cutting the arts from schools. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, this
that's
is very true. Very true. Also, that completely. But no, there's just a big disparity. I think class is such an issue in the
it's
arts in the UK,
massive.
particularly. Mental.
The joke in New York when I first moved here, the joke in New York was, how do you become a success on Broadway? Well, you have to have rich parents. That was it.
Yeah.
And there was,
Eh,
and slash is, a lot of truth to that.
mm,
And for the people like me who are lying about their resume just to get hired to cater, the Billy Elliot opening night party or whatever, like you're begging just to make ends meet. You get really frustrated watching a lot of those people kind of leap above you just because they have the resources to do so. That's tale as old as time as well. But again, to talk about the new talent,
mhm.
whenever I started getting a bit of a following out here in New York, I started playing these shows all over the city at 54 Below and Joe's Pub, and we had these great, amazing parties, basically, where we do an hour and a half concert. And I had a lot of my Broadway friends, and my Tony Award winning friends, and my people from TV, and I had my fancy folks up there with me, but I also teach, and I have a lot of amazing students who are so frustrated who they're not getting the time of day, they're not getting seen at auditions. And I also teach master classes around the country. And I see a lot of these amazing students, and they don't even know if they're going to go to New York because they can't afford it, and their parents don't think there's an opportunity for them out there, blah, blah, blah. I said, what if we flew you to New York and put you in the show? And then you have this video of you with the 54 Below plaque behind you, singing a brand new song in front of a Broadway audience, and this and the other. And it just, so many of those people that I gave those opportunities to over the last 15 years or whatever have gone on to not only book Broadway shows, but Malia Joy Moon, she plays the lead in the Alicia Keys musical on Broadway. She won the Tony last year, and she was
Amazing.
just a part of my concert. And I'm not saying it's because she was in the concert, but more eyes are on her. And that's what I wanted. I wanted
Mhm.
to see success for those artists start to snowball. Because that's another misconception I think about the arts, is this competitiveness. It's in there,
It's a team
it's like
game.
some
Yeah.
it's cemented in there. But at the end of the day, I look at it like this cool little jacuzzi we all get to hang out in at the end of the night, like, where we can talk about it all. It's so important to have friends who are artists as well, not to be competitive with, but to make sure they're okay, because they're doing the same thing you're trying to do. We need that tribe.
Mm,
Anyway, so I
absolutely.
really do hope that in the UK, whoever wins this contest to come and sing with me, and they get to be on a West End stage and put this on their
Mhm.
resume, and it's going to be a really exciting thing, and they'll get to sing a song for the industry, and maybe that's a chance they wouldn't have gotten to get before. So I'm really thrilled that we were able to do that, and that my producers didn't think I was crazy for suggesting it.
No, I think it's brilliant though, and I think it's good that you're still trying to make that happen. And I think, as you say, it's frustrating sometimes that you do need those big names to then get the producers or the money people to set up and go, okay. But it's
Right.
still, you have to play the game. You can only play the game you're in. And I love your pragmatic approach, and it's great to hear you talking about access and be aware of it, and also be grateful
Yeah.
for what you have and stuff. I think we need more people like you doing that. But it's great that you're setting that example, and it's really inspiring to get to talk about in the show. So thank you.
Yeah.
And there's
Thank
links to
you.
all this in the show notes. So if you want to find out about this show, find out about the competition or any of Drew's other work, click below. I have a few more questions I still want to ask you though, but one of them is,
Yeah.
tell us about your process to songwriting. Like, do you compose first? Do you write lyrics first? Do you play the music? Like, I mean, I'm not very. I can just sing. I can't do anything else. So this is all magic to me. But you tell us how it works.
It's far from magic, but sometimes. I mean, I guess sometimes you'll write whatever your yesterday was, or whatever your Blackbird or whatever your McCartney genius thing is, and that comes out, and you're like, I don't know how that happened, but my head just hatched the golden egg, and there it is. In terms of like where I start music lyrics or concept or whatever, it just really depends. Standalone songs are very different because you're kind of fitting an entire arc into 4 minutes. Musicals are very hard. Musicals are very hard. People don't realize how hard musicals are. And sometimes I'll write a musical with a guy who's writing a script, and they'll just send the script to me, and then there'll be like 3 blank pages, and it just says song goes here, and I have no idea what they're talking about. And it's like, why? That can't be why. Just because you say a song goes there, that's not why we sing. That's not why a character needs to break out into song. You got to be really
Mhm.
beyond logical and beyond pragmatic when it comes to why a character sings. So musicals are very hard. But in terms of the process, you got to be able to dive in, grab an emotion, pull it out, voice it as either you or as a completely different character. And then sometimes you're like in rehearsals for a musical, and the director comes up to you and he says, "Hey, the scene change is really loud because they have to move that car backstage. Can you write a 2 minute song that covers that sound?" And you're just like in the woods trying to think of what the fuck could anybody possibly be singing for those 2 minutes just to cover up a noise backstage. So it comes with those odd challenges, but the
Mhm.
joy of it is the accidental process when you're not even trying to write a song, and then you wake up and you're like, oh my god, I'm canceling everything today because I have an idea and this has to be my focus.
Mm.
And that happens like once
That's
every
really.
4 days for me. I'll be like, cancel everything, I have an idea, and I'll go crazy.
Mm. Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, you've done lots of amazing things in your career so far as well. I mean, you've done the Karate Kid first Broadway, didn't you? You did like 1984. You've done some amazing commercial and TV work and stuff as well. Is there a standout moment? I know it must be really hard to reflect on your career like that because you're still in it, but is there like a moment that really stands out to you from all that?
um God, I don't know. It's hard to beat like the first one of those moments that makes you want to like keep chasing moments like that. And there's a Broadway actor named Titus Burgess, and there's another Broadway actor called Jeremy Jordan, and they have these huge followings out here. And when I was a young nobody, and really just starting out, I was messaging them on like Facebook and just blindly, or I'd go like wait by the stage door of whatever Broadway show they were in, and when they would come out, I would like harass them and like say, "Will you sing one of my songs at my next concert? Please, 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 please." I was always met with a no, and then those two guys said yes, and that was back in 2009 or something like that, and it absolutely changed my career. It gave me a career. Them saying yes gave me a career. So I just needed a yes to get started, and those are two of the most significant yeses I got. I don't even think they know how significant those yeses were, but
Mm.
they really helped me get going.
That's amazing. Was there a moment as well? Because I love asking people this. because I tried to think about what the moment was for me a lot. But was there a moment where you thought, okay, I made this kind of work now, like I'm doing the thing I wanted to do? Like, do you remember being a moment where you thought you could identify as a composer or a music, or were you always kind of already comfortable identifying like that anyway?
I think imposter syndrome is something that lives pretty vibrantly within all of us. And I think as everybody's dimmer switch is a little more effective than others. So I do think that the idea of should I even continue doing this, or that met me 1,000 times over the course of my
Mhm.
career, because even if you have the drive and even if you know you want to do this when you're a young kid, when you're met with enough rejection over a short period of time, you start looking at the gods and going, I guess this was not in the cards for us, you know.
Mhm.
And after the pandemic, I had some successes, and life was pretty good leading up to 2020. And then when Broadway shut down, I ran out of money. I couldn't get my lease back up again. Here I was, everybody, like, my name was on TV, theater, Super Bowl commercials, Broadway, like all over the place. And then suddenly everything's gone, and I have to move back in with my parents at the age of 34 or something like that.
Wow.
Something that felt embarrassing to me. And I met this woman who is now my wife, and my mom set us up, as embarrassing as that is. But
No, that's class.
when I moved back to New York to like get my career back up, because the whole industry had to kind of get back up,
Mhm.
I was panicking for a minute. I was like, "Oh God, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know if this industry is gonna get its shit together. I don't know if I have it in me to eat, like. I feel like I'm starting back at zero and I have to climb back up again. I don't know. I think I have to go find a job." And I would say that I have to go find a job. And my now wife, her name is Allison, she would say, "You have a job. You're a songwriter." And it wasn't until I heard someone else say that I felt like I could put my shoulders down and stop having to say it so often as to overcompensate
Mhm.
for the fact that nobody else was saying, "Hey, you're a songwriter. Hey, you know what I mean?" It was an odd thing. And I'm sure people have said things like, "Wow, you're like," I've had fans come up to me on the street and say like, "You're my favorite songwriter." And it even then, even then it took hearing the love of my life say it for me to uh, register the significance of it, I guess.
Mhm. No, thank you very much for sharing that. I appreciate the honesty and
Yeah.
stuff. Like,
Yeah, of
I
course.
think the pandemic really did, like, it was like it, you know, it was a shock. We were talking earlier about
Yeah.
that survival thing. If you were in that mode of survival and you'd found all these strategies, it completely flattened you, and it must be so hard to come back from it. How did you come back? Like when you got to New York and stuff, like was there what how did you get through that period and rise back up to the amazing position you seem to be in now?
Well, I was fortunate because I had signed on to a couple of contracts before the pandemic started. So I just
Mhm.
didn't know if they were going to like ever we were going to get back to work on those projects. So after the pandemic was starting to kind of
Mhm.
nestle its way back to a more comfortable territory, those producers on that project started calling me and said, "Let's get back to work." And thankfully, it wasn't too long before I could strap back in. But I do think about
Mhm.
a lot of the actors who were like in the middle of a Broadway run, and all those shows closed, and all those jobs went away, and all those union jobs went away, and all it
Yeah.
was just like it was so devastating. And
Mhm.
at the time, and horrifyingly again, our president was something of a buffoon. And not to get too political, but when an entire you're watching industries slowly come back and start doing their work, and then you're watching an industry that is forced to stay shut, an industry that depends purely on people getting into a room. And so theater was just so gone and dead much longer than all these other industries that had closed down. And our president would
Mhm.
still come on and talk about how unnecessary the arts were, saying words like that. When again, let's go look at the economy, my friend. Let's go
Mhm.
ask any child what it is they want to do. See what the answer is. They're going to say big business? I don't think so, Mr. President. So So it was tough to watch with a lot of other artists and actors and
Mm.
writers because they didn't have the fortune of having something in the works right before the pandemic started. So in that regard, I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah, it's a complicated time, and I think it's really hard now as well. We talked about again earlier the cost of living and stuff. So I think it
Mm.
is. You know, it's I'm sure hopefully this conversation again. Just I think it's, people just love hearing honesty and hearing people talking about their situation and acknowledging it. Because I think the problem is often people don't actually acknowledge what's going on for people on shows like this, because often it's big celebrities that are doing interviews and they don't
Right.
have to worry about these things. So I think it's really useful to have
Yeah.
people at different
For
stages of their
every
careers
every
talk about
big
it.
celebrity who's getting paid like gargantuan amounts of money, just know that there's like 100,000 other artists who are still working, and they are artists. That is their job. They're just not a celebrity.
Mhm.
Celebrity is a very different thing, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I do think people get those two things twisted up, though.
they definitely do, and it's the glamour as well of it. We see the creative industries as something that is not, and if you go
Right.
into this to get famous, then you're probably not going to leave it very happy,
That's
either.
exactly right.
Um,
That's exactly right.
yeah, because it's about the process. I want to ask you. I ask every guest we have on this show because I think mental health is a very important topic. But how do you protect your mental health as a creative person, especially when you're quite vulnerable? You're putting a lot of your own experiences into your shows and stuff. How do you make sure you look after your mental health and your well-being and stuff?
Well, thanks for asking that. I too advocate strongly for humans, and
Mm,
more in particular artists, to value their mental health, because I think humans are humans and we're going to be feeling things, but artists are humans who wear their organs on the outside of their skin. So when the wind blows, it stings a little harder. You know what I mean? I feel like artists really need to take care of themselves. And years of therapy have helped me out. I have had huge battles with drug abuse and addictive personality, and that's really what is all my anxiety and depression. I think can all get swirled around that one little ism of mine, which has to do with
mm,
alcohol and drugs and addiction. And I'm not sober and I'm not clean. I am more regimented. I have to say that because I don't want people to think I am a recovering um, alcoholic or drug addict. I am a drug addict. I am an alcoholic. And I don't use to the point of self danger anymore because of the tools I've had to acquire and the things that I've had to teach myself over the course of the last 15 years of going to therapy. I am on Lexapro, which has really helped with my anxiety. But beyond that, because let's just say the world of chemicals goes kaput, and I'm not going to push big pharma down anybody's throat right now, the pharmaceutical industry, because none of that's really wonderful. But I think if you find a medication that works, that's really, really helpful. I meditate daily. I do something called noodle, doodle, and journal every day. I have to play piano or guitar at some point, even if I'm not writing music that day. I have to play, and not a song I want to sing, just sit and not have any thoughts, just noodle. I noodle, noodle, noodle. I doodle.
mm,
I have a sketchbook. The reason I doodle is because I used to draw when I was a kid and I loved it and I stopped doing it. So in the last 5 years or so, I started getting back into it. It reminds me why I fell in love with creating. I do that every single day and I journal as many pages as my brain dumps out. I do all of this first thing in the morning before I do anything else, because that is literally, if my brain will not function the way I need it to unless I kind of clear those cobwebs. And those items, those little fixtures in my morning ritual every day, get me onto the starting spot so that my day can go in a forward direction. And when I met with hiccups, I used to have meltdowns. I used to make mountains out of molehills, but now I can sit in the lazy river and let things come as they are. And um, I'm much more at ease that way. And it's honestly, I think it's helped my writing exponentially. Exponentially.
mhm.
It has helped my creative process. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being so honest about your battles and your mental health and stuff. I do think it's really useful to hear people talk about it honestly. And
Yeah.
I've done therapy for a year. I haven't talked about it a lot on the show, but generally, I mean, I know therapy isn't for everyone and it's not always affordable for everyone, but generally one of the best things I've ever done. I feel
Yeah.
like such a better person in many ways. And I
Yes,
do think, and it's incredible when you see that, not for even yourself, but when you see how much better you can show up for the people you love.
that's it.
It's a really lovely thing, and yeah, I
Yeah,
feel very grateful for
100%.
that. So, no, I appreciate you talking about it. I think often as creative people as well, it's that whole like being all chaotic and like the tortured artist mentality that people think they should have. It's actually really unhelpful,
Right.
as you say. Like you're probably making better art as a result of taking care
Right.
of yourself.
Oh, you just
Mm,
said it. Like that idea of like, oh, I should feel this way because it's going to it's going to influence my work in some way, or like this brooding, dark
mm.
feeling I'm having is going to translate into the next, masterpiece I create. No, that's self-torture.
No,
I mean, it's good to
completely.
go through stuff to learn those lessons, but my God, we got to be good to
Yeah.
ourselves, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Drew, I know we've been speaking for an hour, so I've just got two more questions for you before I wrap things up.
Yes,
But
of course, of course.
one of them is, and I love asking this as well, but what's the biggest lesson you've learned in your career so far? And I know that's such a tricky question to answer, but is there like a lesson you've taken away so far in your career that you'd share with our audience, please?
I got a note on a song once that there's two lessons. Two. When you get, both of these lessons have to do with getting feedback from about your creative material, about something you've made. The first one is when you show it to um, another artist, expect to hear the note in an honest way, and you're going to want to take that note the most serious. And the reason I say that is because someone gave me a note once, and they're an artist I look up to, and they said, "Your songs are great. They're just safe." And I hated the word safe so much. I don't want to be safe. I want to open my vein up. You know what I mean? I want to rip my chest open and pour out the contents. I really do. So that note made me always never even veer on the, oh, is this what they're going to want? Oh, is that clever enough? Any of that? No, I'm just going to push and force feed my personality and my sense of humor and my rhyme scheme into people's mouths rather than write thinking what the project is for. If I write unabashedly, it gets the attention I want it to get. I don't like the word safe. So writing for safety, never good. The other piece of advice I got, or the other thing, the lesson learned, is when people who are in charge of something artistic and they themselves are not an artistic person, do not trust their note. Do not trust immediately, I should say. You can trust it down the line if you really percolate and sit on that. But the example I use is I sent a demo in, and it was for a major movie studio. I'm not going to mention who they are. And the response I got was, "Oh God, I usually play these demos when I'm driving to work in the car, and my daughter's in the back seat, and she usually dances. But this time she didn't dance. Would you mind rewriting the song?" That was the note I got. Your daughter didn't dance, so I have to rewrite the song. Fine, that's fine. So I just rolled my eyes and said, "Sure thing, boss. Aye, aye." And I didn't touch the demo. I didn't rewrite the song. I just sent the same exact demo, and their response was, "Great, much better. Thank you so much." So the reason that it's important, distinguishing thing to point out is because a lot of people give a note for the sake of they want to say something to you. A lot of people give a note because they say, "I love what you're doing. Here's how I think you can make it better." When someone says, "My daughter didn't dance to it, will you rewrite it?" That's not a helpful note. So I think the lesson in all of those, and there's been dozens of those stories, is learn who to listen to. And more times than not, it's going to end up being yourself over any of those people. So
Hmm.
that would be the lesson for those creatives out there.
That's super interesting, Drew. My sort of day job in TV is I edit scripts with writers and for drama and
Yeah.
soap and stuff. And my job is a lot of my job is giving notes to writers and working with writers. Something I've learned and something that I would always pass on to other script editors that I'm maybe training and stuff is never give a note because you feel like you haven't said anything in the room for a while, because that's a pointless note because you're just doing it to say something.
That's
If you
it.
don't have anything to
That's
say,
it.
you don't actually have a note to give. So I think that's a really interesting point. So yeah, nice one to
Yes.
pick up there. Yeah. I've got one more question for you to
Yeah,
ask you
sure
before
thing.
we wrap up. But just want to say, like, this has been honestly such an amazing conversation to have. I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate so much more I could ask you. But to leave it on this, because I think it's a great thing to end on. But what would your closing advice be to anyone that wants to work in the creative industries, particularly, but also maybe in musical theatre, where your sort of expertise and stuff lie?
Yeah. That question, I gotta say, gets harder and harder as time goes on. The evolution of everything with technology and how people think they become a success. I think it's all quite misguided. And I think the advice, if I could find the simplest way to say it, which is clearly something I'm not good at doing because it's going to turn into another 45-minute rant. I promise it won't. I would say just drown out the noise. Do not listen to the noise. Don't listen to how come their TikTok got more views than mine when I'm better, or I did it this way, or don't think you have to go through the channels of Instagram or TikTok or social media, period, in order to get seen. You don't. And I think there are a lot of myths in the industry. People make choices based on how big their Instagram following is or something like that. Of course, that does happen sometimes. It is disgusting, but it's not the reason why you're not getting picked. So I think that that is another big distinction to keep in mind, is that the jobs that you don't get weren't yours to lose to begin with. So as an artist, you're going up for jobs all the time. I hope to get this job. I hope to get this job. And a lot of rejection feels like, oh, I didn't get it. You know what I mean? It feels like a loss of some kind because you worked for a few days on the material, on getting that job, whether it's writing a spec song or auditioning for a show. If you don't get that job, you have to move on quickly. It was not your job to get, period. And things move so fast. Sorry, this is getting ranty again already. Just drown out the noise. Drown out the noise. Follow your heart. And that's not something I did easily either. You know, all I wanted to do was be Jason Robert Brown or Joe Iconis when I was growing up, when I was like in my 20s. And the minute I stopped trying to imitate the people that influenced me, and the moment I said, what do I sound like? Or what does my internal creative voice feel like or sound like? The more I looked at that instead of listening to what does the world want? What does the world expect from me? The more I stopped asking those questions and just listened to me, that's suddenly when my career really started taking off in a direction that was like, oh, Drew has a thing he does. Not Drew is following the path of these other people who have done that thing. So anyway, there's advice in what I just said somewhere. I'm sure there is.
No, for sure. And I think, again, like a quote we'd had in the show before is that comparison is like creative kryptonite, because it's so, and I do think about that a lot. Sometimes you do have to look inwards because there's so much noise. And even doing podcasting, right? Often now with podcasts, when I run it, because I obviously want people to listen, it's a tricky balance because you have to give these sort of clickbaity titles, and I try to resist doing that sometimes because there isn't one answer. Do you know what I mean? It's like you do those episodes, it's like how to become successful musical theatre composer with you, for example. I don't want to call the episode that because that's not what we're saying. We're saying that it's very nuanced. It's a grey thing. There isn't an answer to give someone. The world's changing.
But if you do want a title, the title should just be Drew Gasparini bears all when he strips naked on this next episode. What do you think?
Here we go, man. Well, we can workshop it. We can workshop it. Drew, thank you so much. It's a great place to leave it. But honestly, man, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your honesty. I really appreciate your passion. And I've loved your rants as well. And I agree with a lot of it.
Thank you
so much.
What a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.